You know what I love? I love learning. And my parents would be shocked. If you had told them back when I was in high school that I would grow up with a thirst for learning and talking about what I've learned, they'd think you were talking about the wrong person. Now, with the vinyl playback experience, there's always something to learn, and there's a labyrinth to constantly find yourself in, like the one I'm about to present you with right now. If you are buying, say, your first turntable or you're looking to upgrade a turntable, you're going to be faced with the decision whether or not to go with a belt-driven turntable or a direct drive turntable. Now, which one do you choose? If you go on forums and ask that question, you're going to get a bunch of opinions, and some of them will be very heated and adamant about what they have to say. And I don't quite get it because it's really two paths to the same destination. Now, before we get into belt and direct drives, let's talk about what came before them, a little bit of history. And who doesn't like history? Well, I know some don't like history, so I'll just be a minute here. But before there were belt drives and before there were direct drives, there was a little thing called the idler wheel. It was a simple and powerful system where the motor spun a little rubber wheel that was known as the idler. It, in turn, spun the platter. It was a great solution on paper, but it did have a big drawback, and that was vibrations. With everything coupled together, it wasn't hard for vibrations from the motor to travel right to the platter, and that's not a good thing. The stylus inevitably picked those little vibrations up, and the result was a low-frequency noise called rumble. Now, that was fine for the radio. Listeners didn't really pick up on rumble when they were listening to the radio. But at home, rumble was a thing that they had to deal with. It was the way life was back then. It was the beginning of home audio. It was a common problem, so engineers tried to come up with ways to spin a record and keep the noisy motor away. And then someone had a brilliant idea. Why not a belt? It's not really clear who came up with the concept of using a belt to spin the platter, but it was popularized by inventor Edgar Vilker. Maybe it's Vilcher, but I'm going to go with Vilker. But anyways, he also designed the acoustic suspension loudspeaker. You can find that tech still is in use today with speakers like the Model 5s that I have here. They use an acoustic suspension. During his time with acoustic research, Vilker championed the belt drive turntable. What it had going for it was that it was simple. The solution to rumble was to physically move the motor away from the platter and connect the two with a thin rubber belt. Now, the cherry on top of using the rubber belt was that it acted like a filter, and it soaked up some of the vibrations before they reached the platter, and music lovers looking for a black background loved this. Another innovation to further prevent vibrations from reaching the record was to isolate the platter and the Tonearm from the rest of the turntable by the use of springs. Think of the Lynn Sondeck LP12 or even my Thorens TD160 Super. But, and there's always a but, the low noise of the belt drive did have its drawbacks. Ironically, it was the belt itself. After many hours of use, the belt can stretch and slip over time. And this leads to pitch variations, what we call wow and flutter. It's more common with, I would say, entry-level belt drives, but it's inherent in varying degrees with any belt drive turntable, or can be, and it's minimized today with some of the innovations that have come along in turntable design. But wow and flutter is a thing. If you hear a sustained piano note or say a guitar note that doesn't quite sound stable, that's probably because of wow and flutter. And there was a group of folks who did want something better as audio progressed. And I'm not talking about audiophiles, I'm talking about radio DJs. They needed turntables that could get up to speed almost instantly when the record was cued to play. They also needed it to hold that speed without fail night after night. A belt wasn't reliable enough. You didn't want to hear wow and flutter in real time over the airwaves, just like you didn't want to hear rumble. And the solution was a game changer. Matsushita, the company that we now know as Panasonic and Technics, rolled out the SP10. The answer, invented by engineer Shuichi Obata, is the direct drive motor. There is no belt or idler wheel between the platter and the motor. The platter actually sits right on top of the motor's spindle, allowing it to get up to speed in the fraction of a second. And radio DJs loved this. They loved the SP10. The tech really hit the mainstream with the Technics SL-1200, introduced in 1972. And when hip-hop entered the scene, those early pioneers found that the SL-1200's motor was unshakable. You could literally spin the record backwards and forwards without affecting the platter's speed. It was a beast that became a musical instrument in its own right. With many direct drives, the speed is constantly monitored to ensure that it stays at the correct speed. That's one of its greatest strengths. Opponents of the early direct drives called out its tendency to introduce a tiny shudder. It was barely audible, and it was called cogging. Belt drives didn't have this problem. And this is where the age-old debate comes from that claims, or that says, that belt drives are for audiophiles and direct drives are for DJs. Fair enough as origin stories go, but the engineers of today have basically solved all of those past problems when it comes to cogging with direct drives or wow and flutter with belt drives. While they are still there, it's so minimized as to really be inaudible. And you'll still see that argument on forums today. People will say that belt drives are quieter and direct drives are louder. And I probably even said that myself in the past. And it gets repeated over and over till it becomes an indisputable fact. But it's not a fact. With direct drives, they basically solved the problem using what's known as a coreless direct drive motor that was a breakthrough technology, and it essentially solved for that cogging effect. And this allows for the platter to spin with a smoothness that wipes out all of those old complaints. Direct drive makers now build turntables with bodies that are meant to absorb vibrations. They also dampen the motor, so it's very silent. Belt drives have also had its fair share of innovations. High-end belt drives are using sophisticated electronic motor controls to get dead-on speed accuracy, just like direct drives do. The lines have blurred. A great turntable is basically a great turntable. So which do you choose? But I have good news for you. You can't make a bad choice. You can make a mistake by buying a turntable that's cheaply made. There are a lot of turntables out there that are supposedly entry-level, but are very bad, actually. So just do your research. As far as if you're worried about whether to get a belt drive or direct drive, I can tell you that that's one worry you can let go. The difference today is choosing a philosophy that works for you and how you listen to music. I'm admittedly a purist, and there's something about the belt drive turntable that resonates with me. I'll never tell you it's better than every direct drive out there. I just like the concept of passive isolation. A belt drive is an emotional choice for me. Put me in front of a direct drive for a couple of hours, say with a blindfold on, and then switch over to my Thorens, with everything else being equal, the Tonearm, the stylus, and everything else, I probably couldn't tell the difference. So who's the winner here? We are. Those of us who love to listen to records. We now have access to machines that are quieter and more musical than they have ever been before. The question is no longer which technology is better, it's which expression of engineering do I connect with? And that's about it. Thank you so much for watching. I also have a newsletter. I've talked about it many times before. There's a link in the description. It comes out once a week. It's free to join. And in those articles that I write for the newsletter, there's sometimes a little bit more personal and things that I talk about there that I don't feel would quite fit a video. So thanks again. And until next time, please take care of yourself and enjoy your records. I'll see you soon.